We're going to be in Luke chapter 5 this morning. If you want to turn there with me, feel free. We'll also have all the scriptures up on the screen as we go through together. We do a lot of following these days. We follow people on social media. We follow the news. Over the holidays, I put together a play restaurant set and a dresser, and you better believe I did my best to follow the directions, even if they sometimes didn't seem to make much sense. Even those of us who might be leaders in one area of our lives would do well to remember and to follow the instructions of others in other areas of our lives. If I'm doing it right, I'm typically following my doctor, dentist, or mechanic's instructions. We do a lot of following, but who we follow and how we follow is of critical importance. One of the funniest scenes that I've ever seen depicting the dangers of following poorly, following blindly, was in the TV show The Office. So in this episode, Michael and Dwight, the company's manager and his henchman, I've never found a better way to describe that particular relationship. But anyway, they are on their way. They're out driving, looking for something. And they're in a rental car that has one of these newfangled GPSs. Some older, try not to feel old. Michael insists on following its directions, despite the fact that the right turn it is commanding them to take clearly goes down a boat ramp and into the lake. As he turns and the car begins to slide into the water, Dwight is yelling about the lunacy of following its instructions and driving into the lake, while Michael keeps repeatedly hollering with a death grip on the steering wheel, "The machine knows! The machine knows!" We do a lot of following these days, and a lot of the following we do as a culture is not very healthy. We follow the words and guidance of celebrity influencers or spiritual gurus who don't know us or care about us. We follow political parties, and those parties often want us to follow like Michael followed the GPS, blindly listening to their instructions even when it doesn't seem to be what we think we should do. We, more and more in recent months as a society, follow the advice and guidance of AI chat programs as if they know what they're talking about and aren't just the conglomeration of the wisdom of the Reddit comments section. And that's often the best case scenario for where that wisdom comes from. We do a lot of following these days, and a lot of it isn't very healthy. So how do we learn how to follow and who to follow in a healthy way if we want to be moving in the right direction? This morning, we're going to read one of the longer accounts in the Bible of Jesus calling his first disciples, his first followers in Luke's gospel. We're going to discover who we should follow and why, how we follow, and what a life of following looks like. And I think as we go through the story, we're going to realize that this serves as kind of a demonstration of, or a general picture of, what it looks like for any of us to follow Jesus in our lives. So we're going to jump into chapter 5, Luke chapter 5, and I'm going to read verses 1 through 4 as we get started here. On one occasion, while the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret. And he saw 2 boats by the lake, but the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. Getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, he asked him to put out a little from the land, and he sat down and taught the people from the boat. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." And we'll pause there. I once saw a chart that was trying to describe a couple different fundamental ways to look at the world that different elements of our culture, our society would push us towards. On one side was a group of philosophical ideas that we might call determinism. It was the idea that the universe is perfectly orderly, that all actions have an equal and opposite reaction, and that the dominoes have been falling since the start of time in a so far endless line of cause and effect. In this paradigm, everything is determined by pure predictability, pure necessity. It happens because the thing before it happened, and as a result, our choices are meaningless. Your choice was made 1,000 years ago. It's just part of a big long line proceeding into history and out into the future where none of us really have a choice at anything. On the other side was what we might term nihilism or anarchy. It was the idea that no, the world is pure chaos. It's all chance and unpredictability. The butterfly's wings caused the hurricane. Who knows what could happen? And therefore, strangely, again, our decisions are in the opposite way meaningless. They're free. They're utterly free. But they're free because they exist in a system where there is no storyline, there is no progression, there are no happy endings, just chance and chaos. As Christians, our view of the world stands in opposition to both of these worldly philosophies. That doesn't mean we'll never agree on anything, but it does mean that our view of the world is too different from either of those options to have a true camaraderie with their ideas. And the simple reason for that is God. We believe in God. In an orderly and consistent universe? Absolutely, because we have an orderly and consistent God. A universe in which God is in control and sovereign. And we believe in a universe where our choices matter. We believe in a universe where there's real moral weight to our actions. How can we believe this? Well, the Christian view of the world holds this in tension, not because of our staggering intellect or philosophical brilliance. We hold it in tension because we believe in a being, in a God, who is great enough, mighty enough, powerful enough, amazing enough that he says it is this way, and we say, if you say it, we think you're powerful enough to make it real. That we can hold on to both of these, and God is unbothered by the tension that we see from our point of view. C.S. Lewis put it this way in an essay. He said, in Hamlet, a branch breaks and Ophelia is drowned. Did she die because the branch broke, or because Shakespeare wanted her to die at that point in the play? Either, both, whichever you please. The alternative suggested by the question is not a real alternative at all once you have grasped that Shakespeare is making the whole play. We believe as Christians in both the importance of our decisions as individuals and in the sovereign direction and consistency of every page of the story, because we believe that there is a good and consistent and true author who cares about us. And you might be saying to yourself at this point, John, why have we spent the first 5 minutes of this message doing a philosophical rabbit trail into predestination? Good question. Here's our thought. In this story, in the calling of the disciples, if we are viewing this as a framework for how God calls all of his disciples, you and me and everybody who's come before us for 2,000 years, then we need to see that there is a fundamental truth here that we have to accept, or else the rest of it doesn't make sense. In Charles Dickens' novel, A Christmas Carol, the very first line of the book, for anybody who's read the book, in addition to watching the movies and the best movie version, A Muppet Christmas Carol, and it's quoted in the best movie version, A Muppet Christmas Carol. The opening line of the book is, Marley was dead to begin with. And Dickens goes on to say over the course of the first page, you have to buy into this fundamental truth. Marley was dead. And at one point he says, this must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I am going to relate. For the later steps in our story of Jesus' calling of the disciples to make sense to us, we must see here that it all starts with Jesus. not with the disciples. Simon doesn't go looking for him and beg for him to come and sit in his ship. The fishermen don't one day just kind of turn as one from their work and say, there is something more out there and we must go and pursue the Messiah and go off into the wilderness. This isn't how it happens. He comes for them. He comes for us. The story of following Jesus isn't about how great we are because we realized who to follow and how. The story of following Jesus is ultimately about His kindness in helping us to find Him, in helping us to seek Him out. As Paul puts it in the book of Romans, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. We have to have the foundation of the gospel, strangely, before we even get into the calling of the disciples. We have to see that we believe in a God who came and became man, who lived a perfect life, who died a death that He did not deserve, and yet that He chose so that He could take death to give us life. And then, because death has no power over Him, because death has no dominion over Him, because He is showing us that it has lost its sting and its power over us as well, He rises from the dead and promises that one day we will do the same. The story of following Jesus has to always and forever start with who He is and what He has done for us, or, as Dickens put it, nothing wonderful can come of the story I am going to relate. So let's go ahead with that foundation and dive further into the story. We're going to look at verse 5. Just one verse. So Jesus tells them to put out into the deep and let down their nets for the catch. And Simon answered, Master, we toiled all night and took nothing, but at your word I will let down the nets. One of my favorite movies in recent years, and one of our favorites as a family, was Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. For those of you who haven't seen it, don't get hung up on the title. It's too long. We get it. Understood. But it's a story about becoming a hero. It's an origin story. It's a coming-of-age story about discovering who you were made to be and how you can help the people around you. And at one point, this young kid chosen to become a hero is questioning himself. He's wondering if he is enough for the task that has been set before him. And he asks his mentor character, how will I know when I'm ready? And the mentor answers, you won't. It's a leap of faith. Simon had been out all night and had nothing to show for it. Him and all the other guys on the crew. They were tired, they were worn, they were weary. They needed to repair the damage that the night before had done to their nets. That's what it means when it says that they're washing the nets. They're pulling out the tangles, they're getting it undone, they're finding places where they need to mend it. They're doing all the work to be able to go home and rest and get ready for doing it all again the next day. And then Jesus steps into the boat and starts teaching. And now remember, this isn't Simon Peter yet. This isn't the apostles, the disciples yet. These are fishermen, day laborers, tired from work and ready to go home. And Jesus steps into their boat. They aren't disciples yet, but that doesn't mean they know nothing. They call him Master. There's a crowd around to listen to him. He's been ministering in the area. They've likely started to hear about him from other people around them. And now they're getting to listen to some of his teaching as he teaches from the boat while they're mending and fixing their nets. And for the first time, here in verse 5, they are forced into a situation where believing in Jesus is going to cost them something. Sleep at the minimum, possible damage to their nets, and even more work at the worst. Remember, he says, put out into the deep water. They're not going 15 feet out from the shore. They're going to have to row out into the lake. They're going to have to do all the work. They're going to have to pull everything in, take it back out, pull it back in, etc., etc. And they have to decide, do I trust this person enough to make this worthwhile? Remember how we said that this story is kind of a microcosm for the story of anyone who wants to become a follower of Jesus. There comes a time where you have to decide, am I in or am I out? And if you decide that you're in, it's going to cost you something. Because Jesus is not, the Jesus we find in the Bible is not just a friendly teacher who's here to give you some advice and make you feel good about yourself and then you go home with it. This is the Lord, the Master. He's the one who's in charge of my life now, not me. And that's the case for all Christians. It will cost us. It'll cost us financially because he tells us that everything he gives us is a gift and we're supposed to give back out of that gift to help the needs of others. It'll cost us time because he wants to be our friend and no friendship grows without investing time into it. It'll cost you in your social standing because no matter what political side we're on, what cultural group we run with, what worldly allegiances we hold, he will teach you things that will upset that apple cart and he'll ask you to live like you really believe it. Following is going to cost all of us something. And just like we said for that hero's journey at the beginning, in the end, it's a leap of faith. Do we believe that Jesus is who he said he was? And if so, then it's time to toss out the nets and see what happens. So let's go to verses 6 and 7 and kind of see our next step in the story. And when they had done this, put out the nets, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. They signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both of the boats so that they began to sink. And we'll pause there. Our decisions have consequences. Sometimes that's bad. Like a few years ago when someone shoved a wad of paper towels into our family's washing machine. And I had an entire load of laundry come out looking like it had been snowing, except the snow clung to everything and refused to come off no matter what I did. But sometimes the results are good. Sometimes we make good decisions. And as Christians, we believe in a sovereign God who works all things together for his glory and our good. And so our trust in him is never disappointed. It will always produce good fruit. Note, that doesn't always mean easy fruit. It doesn't always mean comfortable fruit. It doesn't always mean what I would have expected in a million years kind of fruit. But it is always good fruit. And here, for the disciples, their faith is immediately rewarded by getting to see the blessing of their belief. So many fish that they can't even handle it with just their one boat. The nets strained to the point of breaking. They're overwhelmed with the weight of the blessing they receive. Introspection moment here. I do realize that sometimes I, as an individual, am really good at cautioning, at making sure we know how tough the road might be as Christians. I think sometimes I tend to major on the expect to suffer for Jesus side of the equation, but without sometimes maybe doing enough motivating and encouraging and putting enough weight on expect to be blessed by Jesus at the same time. This is a chunk of the story that is just unmitigated blessing. It's an immediate blessing. They don't wait 6 hours out in the boat to get it in. They obey and boom, fish. Congratulations. It's an unexpected blessing. Nobody says, hey, Jesus told us to put out the nets. Maybe we should go get more nets and more boats. And nobody said, I think we're going to need a bigger boat. It's a reference. You might have seen the movie or not. They aren't anticipating the kind of blessing they're going to receive. And it's an abundant blessing. It's an overwhelming blessing. It's not a few fish. It's not a, well, I guess that at least makes up for the bad night kind of fish. It's a, we don't have enough space in this boat amount of fish. It is an overly enthusiastic used car salesman's worth of fish. Fish, 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 fish. It's a crazy amount. They are overwhelmed with the amount of blessing that God drops into their lives. And I am convinced that we maybe don't see it as much as we should because of our sinful hearts and because that's just not how we're geared sometimes as human beings. But I think God is blessing us like this so often in our lives. There are so many good things that He's giving to us. There are so many blessings that He has put on us. We are being blessed in immediate, unexpected, and abundant ways all the time. And interestingly, here in the story, I think we see a picture of what we're supposed to do with those blessings, how we are supposed to respond. Let's read verses 8 through kind of the first half of verse 10. So after all this happens, it says, when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And we'll pause there. Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. A couple of years ago, I listened to an amazing podcast series called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. It was about a mega church in Seattle called Mars Hill, who would have guessed. And in the span of just a couple decades, the church grew to be one of the largest in America, and in the span of only a few short months, ceased to exist entirely. The story revolved around Mark Driscoll, the charismatic young pastor and teacher who planted Mars Hill, and then whose nose for conference and online teaching opportunities brought him, and with him Mars Hill, into a place of prominence. Mark was a powerful teacher. He often would preach for more than an hour and not be uninteresting for any part of it. But as the story rolled along, you started realizing that something was wrong under the surface. Key leaders within the church started getting tossed to the side, only to resurface with stories of destructive and controlling behaviors demonstrated by Driscoll. In a famous interview, Mark said, "There is a pile of dead bodies behind the Mars Hill bus, and by God's grace, it'll be a mountain by the time we're done. Either you get on the bus or you get run over by it. Those are the options, but the bus ain't gonna stop." And it would soon come to light that Mark had plagiarized chunks of many of the books that he had written and had used church funds to pay a company to push his books higher on the New York Times bestseller list. All of this and more led to the church's board of elders placing Mark under church discipline. It also led to Mark fleeing that discipline without addressing his destructive behavior, later starting a new church in another city where, to all reports since, he's continued unhealthy and destructive leadership tendencies. Mark Driscoll looked at the blessings that God had sent into his life, and at least from all of our evidence that we can see looking from the outside looking in, he said to himself, "I deserve this. I have earned this. I am getting all of this because I am hot stuff. I am great." And then he said, "And I want even more." God blessed him with fame and fortune, influence and authority, and he started hurting and manipulating the people around him in order to acquire more and more and more. But here in Luke's story, we see the total opposite response to receiving this abundant blessing from God. Simon receives this, and funny enough, we now get Simon Peter. It's in this humble response that he starts getting referred to by the name he gets known as an apostle. He says, "Lord, I am a sinful man. Depart from me. I am unworthy." Following Jesus is going to bring blessings into our lives. But those blessings shouldn't puff us up. They should produce humility in us. They should help us more and more to see how great God is, not to think how great I am. I'm actually more and more thinking that this is the number one sign of spiritual growth in us as Christians. Am I growing in humility? Am I growing in that? And we should note that the old C.S. Lewis quote is entirely true, that humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. Humility for the Christian is not, woe is me, I'm the worst, I'm terrible, I'm awful, oh, I'm so terrible. Because who was I just talking about that whole time? Me. I'm still talking about me when I'm acting that way. Humility, when we see it in the Bible expressed, isn't self-flagellation. It's growing in my others-focusedness. It's the motto of the sports camp that I helped run in Pennsylvania for a few years. God first, others second, I'm third. That's biblical humility, not beating myself up, but putting others and God ahead of myself. If I'm following Jesus, it means I'm growing in humility. And so this is a good gut check moment for all of us, right? Think about your life. When you receive a great blessing, is it time to glory in it, or is it time to share it? Is your heart geared toward gratitude or greed? Following Jesus should mean that more and more we get to see the great blessings of God, grace and mercy, friends and family, good work and true rest, beauty and joy and humor and happiness, and we see all these things and we receive them, and our heart is full of thankfulness and humility and a desire to share them with others. And speaking of others, there's one last note here in the passage about following Jesus. Let's read the end of verse 10 and then into verse 11. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching men." And when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. We've talked about what following Jesus means for us, growing in humility, gratitude. But here I think we see what following Jesus should mean for the people around us, through us. We get the famous line that you will be fishers of men, paraphrased a little bit here in this passage. If we've been blessed in the way that we saw in these last few verses, overwhelmingly, abundantly, unexpectedly, then we should be sharing that with others. We should share it in the tangible, physical sense of sharing our possessions, our time, our talent, our wealth, our ability, etc. But also, in the crucial sense, we should be telling people about Jesus. Because if I am not the source of the blessings in my life, if Jesus is the source of all the blessings in my life, and if we're going with that fishing analogy here, then this is the source of the famous, if you give a man to fish, or if you teach a man to fish analogy. We can share, and we should share, of the good gifts that God has given us in our lives. Absolutely. But that's a Band-Aid. Give a man a fish, feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. We need to be sharing, where do the actual blessings come from? We need a real long-term solution. And that means introducing people to Jesus if he is the source of all the blessings that we receive. This fishing analogy here is so fun. It gives us such a great basis for talking about this. When you go fishing, sometimes, or if you're me, almost all the time, you don't catch anything. Our job isn't the results of telling people about Jesus. Sometimes nothing's going to happen. Our job is to be faithful, to give the gospel to others, to give that good news, and then to pray for God to be at work. Another great piece of the analogy here. If you're going fishing, you need bait. They're not going to catch if you just throw a hook in and hope something happens. You need to know what the fish is looking for, and you need to provide it. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not telling you to twist the gospel's message to fit someone's preconceptions. I don't want to have somebody after the service come up to me and say, "John, I hear you. And I've often heard that people in my area are looking for good-looking singles to date, and who am I to say no? We're not endorsing missionary dating. We're not saying just go out and say whatever you have to say, do whatever you have to do, go out and get somebody to say what you think. That's not where we're going. What we're saying here is that we believe as Christians that all true good, all true beauty, all true truth in the world is God's. And therefore, the real things, those deeper things that our friends and family and neighbors and coworkers are looking for, they can only find them in Jesus. We know where they can go to find those things that they're looking for. And so if we really care about people and get to know them and value them as human beings, we're going to start hearing, what is that special pull that God is putting on their heart? Where is that thing that they feel like they need that they can only find when they find Jesus? And we can help them to see you can only get this by following the person that we're following. That our hearts need those things too, but we've found where we can get it. One last note as we close out this morning, and that's on the timeline of following Jesus. It can be really easy to miss here, but when Jesus speaks to them, he says, do not be afraid. From now on, you will be fishers of men. There is no end point. He doesn't say you will be fishers of men until you catch 12 other men to follow me and bring them along. This isn't a pyramid scheme. He doesn't say you will fish men until I have achieved my goals here on earth and am ruling over everyone. It's not an earthly empire. He doesn't even say you will be fishers of men until it gets too hard, because there will be times when it's hard, but the Bible tells us over and over that Jesus will be with us through those times. It is from now on. Following Jesus is the never-ending story. As C.S. Lewis put it, it's further up and further in. The greatest story ever told, where every page is better than the one before, and the story never ends. From now on. Would you pray with me this morning? Lord.